Why do we feel contracted, in other words? How can that contraction take place in consciousness? How can that, let us rephrase it, which illumines everything, right? How can that which illumines everything can be ever overshadowed by that which it illumines? I want to ask you in turn. In other words, I want to repeat myself again. Please forgive me for that, because I want to dwell on it. How can that which illumines every experience, absolutely every, there's nothing that does not illumines. It illumines the light within the sun. Photonic emission, right, itself is illumined by that light. And then the sun only acts as a sun. The ability of I as an instrument to see is illumined by that very, very power. By that same power. The ability to comprehend these very words or any other words are illumined by that power. Both pleasure and pain are illumined by that power. How can that, I'm asking you again, which by its very nature illumines everything, can be abstracted or overshadowed by that which it illumines? How can that happen? What happens?
In the moment of the isness of the illumination. That's isness. And then, so quickly, the mind kicks in to name it. It is something, and then it's gone. As soon as that happens, it's gone.
Sure, but there's no such thing as mind independent from that luminosity, isn't it? The ability of mind to comprehend anything, the very ability of the mind is the ability of consciousness.
Because maybe the illumination and that which illumines is so bright, is so powerful, it shuts down that which it's reflecting on.
So in other words, you presuppose or you suggest that it's simply being blinded to its own light, to its own brilliance.
In a sense.
It's not a bad proposition.
In a sense.
Yeah, consciousness simply blinds itself by its magnificence. Quite like that. Can I have the authority to use it in my writing? 'Cause I can.
It's I-A-N.
But what I'm asking you is not look for the answer. This is where the trap is. All I'm asking you is to ponder on this with me. You're already looking for an answer and looking for the solution. And I just said earlier that everything is built paradox upon paradox. There's no solution simply because there's no problem. So again, how come that which illumines everything overshadow itself? How can that be overshadowed? Let's go further. In other words, even the thought, I am bound. And when I say thought, when we say thought, we know that thought means everything. Thought is also a feeling. Thought is also an idea. It's a sensation. It could be felt in the body directly. It could be much more transparent, much more ephemeral. However, a thought itself that I'm bound is also illumined by the same power of your own awareness. So in other words, we're not only asking ourselves here, how can that which illumines everything in this house, absolutely everything, there's nothing that is not illumined in this house by the power of my own self, can ever be obstructed. This in itself could be a form of self-inquiry. This in itself could be a form of self-inquiry. Luminous and self-aware. Luminous and self-aware. It is that luminosity of consciousness which gives rise to the power of its own self-awareness. Whether the world is real or unreal, whether there is, how can awareness exist in relation to the world, or how can the world exist in relation to awareness. So luminous and self-aware are literally expressed through that very, very basic tenets of Tantric philosophy, Tantric tradition. There are terms even in Sanskrit. Prakasha and Vimarsha. Prakasha, it's literally that luminosity. Prakasha, luminosity. Effulgence. That which by its own nature is a light into itself, onto itself. And Vimarsha. Vimarsha, it's that power inherent in awareness, to be aware of itself. Hence this whole dialogue. This whole dialogue that I've invited you to partake literally rests on that. Rests on this understanding, and it invites this contemplation without necessarily coming up with solutions or answers, because answers are the solutions. Prakasha and Vimarsha, literally. That which is effulgent by its very nature. Effulgent. The self is effulgent. Luminous. It illumines everything. As we said earlier, it illumines absolutely everything. Every functioning, every event, every phenomena is illumined by that. Why and how? Precisely because it's luminous. Without that power, there will be no luminosity. The direct and most immediate example is like if there is no sun, imagine, and just forget about for a moment about electricity. Imagine there is no sun. It'll be pitch black. Not just dark. It'll be pitch black. Because there'll be not reflective awareness of the moon even there. So you can take a moonwalk, right, under the full moon. It's still a lot of light. But without the sun in the solar system, there will be simply no way to distinguish anything, because everything will be simply submerged in total darkness. Darkness of unpenetrable degree. That is just like basic example, so that you can have a little bit more of a immediate understanding of what does it mean everything is illumined by consciousness. Just like everything is illumined by the sun, everything is illumined by consciousness. Absolutely everything. So that power of its own self-inherent luminosity, it's the very nature of consciousness. And it is accompanied, always accompanied by its own power of self-awareness. So symbolically speaking, that's how oneness is in relation to duality. That's how oneness is in relation to that which is, by its very nature, at once luminous and aware of itself. And this whole unfoldment of this dialogue is precisely was to point towards that. How can there be any awareness if there is not accompanied by the power of self-awareness? This is where many teachers give it a miss. This is where many people who teach spirituality, when they say there's only awareness and bust, nothing else exists but awareness. This is where misunderstanding comes in. Because then this whole world is literally submerged by darkness, because it's no longer illumined by its own power. This reality, this physical reality, this reality that we perceive down through the senses, is precisely that manifestation of the power of self-awareness. In other words, it's another hint, complete another take on the relationship between absolute and relative. It's an entirely new take on what is absolute there by its very nature and what is relative. Relative suddenly is not something which is just like a flimsy phenomena. It's gone and insignificant, makes no sense and makes no impact. Contrary to that, it is where the self rests as the self, but at the same time as this world. Because it is empowered by the power of self-awareness. And in order for the self-awareness to exist, consciousness needs to look at itself in the mirror. How can it know its magnificence? This is why I like that, what Ian brought up. How can consciousness know its own brilliance, its own luminosity, its own magnificence, its own omnipresence, omnipotence, if it is not contrasted and reflected back as something which is finite? Ever-changing, ephemeral, phenomenal by its very nature. Where I would like us to go back is again to that original question: how can that which illumines everything can ever be overshadowed, right, by that what it illumines? And another thing that I would like to draw attention back is to that relationship between Prakasha and Vimarsha, the relationship between luminosity and the power of self-awareness. And when we said that it's a rehabilitation and another take on this world, this existence, this world, down to the elementary order, down to the elementary order. It's literally the manifestation of Prakasha, the manifestation of the power of self-awareness. In other words, and I quite like this example, which I keep repeating, is that consciousness wants to have as many angles and as many possible views of itself as it can possibly master. Hence this multiplicity. Everything that exists in consciousness exists for the sake of consciousness to behold itself. Literally. Literally. Whenever you behold something or someone, whenever you hear something or someone, whenever you smell, whenever you touch, it is that, literally. It exists within consciousness to behold. That is the power of Vimarsha. And very tenderly in some scriptures, in Tantric scriptures, it is called Vimarshini. Like a darling, a darling Vimarsha, Vimarshini. Vimarsha is a Shakti, literally. that primordial power which gives rise to all energies. So it's not even correct to say Shakti is energy, because it's to limit Shakti. Shakti is that which gives rise to all energy, to all known energies, to all unknown energies. And that Vimarsha, that power of self-awareness, is literally this world. The universe is the shape. Literally, the universe is the form. The form that the very esoteric language of Tantra is that relationship of Shiva and Shakti continuously being brought and re-examined through various philosophical treatises or poetic revelations. It's that relationship between the power of self-awareness and awareness itself, pure awareness, and the field of all potentialities are in constant relationship, in constant communion, in constant union. That's what really the true meaning of Tantric symbology. This is the union with the disunion. This is the union. So this world of forms and phenomena is seen suddenly through very different eyes and understood with different degree of penetration. It's understood not as some kind of ephemeral mirage, some kind of maya, some kind of illusion that needed to be transcended and getting rid of to abide in that which is our essential nature, but actually understood, if you will, in much more humane way. It is understood as the very form of the God, the very form of that which illumines every aspect and every possible manifestation of that form. Hence, Tantra does not work with necessarily the categories of, because it does not negate the world. And since it does not negate the world, it has a very different relationship with it. Since it does not negate, because it has a very different understanding of what the world is, instead of negating it, it works with it. So, that which could be considered as something which is a great nuisance, something to transcend, bypass, get away from, get done and over with, right? It's like a lot of religious doctrines. Up until you're in this body, you got to suffer, and then ascension to heaven when you die. Like, kind of may sound primitive, but it kind of took hold for quite a while, and not only in religious indoctrinations. Some spiritual, quite credible spiritual doctrines ended up with that really there is nothing that this world can offer, nothing this world can add to us, because it's simply a mirage in the middle of the desert, and where we got caught. Instead, it has a different understanding that this very world is pure awareness down to the elementary order. And this is why there's even a sutra which resolves everything, right? Outright, it says that even the Bhumi Tattva, Bhumi stands for earth, which is the grossest Tattva, as we know, is pure awareness. Bhumi is Shiva. Bhumi Tattva is Shiva. There's nothing that is not Shiva. There's nothing that is not pure awareness. So that which is the grossest, it's already manifestation of awareness itself. So, from Tantric perspective, from the perspective of this understanding, the process of realization even seen slightly in a different light. The realization itself is seen not as transcending this world and abiding in that which is omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, but actually embodying here and now these very qualities of Shiva, these very qualities, through the instrumentality of this body. Because this instrumentality is the divine, absolutely divine manifestation. And the whole thing, the whole picture is, and the emphasis is very much on the understanding of the expansion and contraction within consciousness. And this is where, at the moment, the emphasis of what I am compelled to share. So, in other words, one can wait until full impact of self-realization, or until one fully awakened to the self, until one is fully enlightened. But what I am tentatively introducing here is this understanding that contraction and expansion of consciousness is independent on the status of whether we consider ourselves to be enlightened, or whether we consider ourselves to be ignorant, or whether we consider ourselves to be somewhere in between. That's all there is. It's contraction and expansion of pure awareness. And the very aim of Tantra is to find yourself right in the middle of this contraction-expansion business. To find yourself literally within that which continuously expands, continuously contracts, and contracts and expands on each respective level. In other words, I don't want you to just understand it in that way, as opposed to that. It happens at every level, at infinitesimally small level, as well as at the most grandiose level, simultaneously. And that is directly perceivable at the heart, at the spiritual center. When that has been cognized, our awareness no longer wobbles and no longer confused by the notions of whether I'm enlightened or whether I'm still ignorant, or whether I'm in between. What do I do about it? Enlightened or ignorant are all subjected to this throb of Shiva.